Hey folks, good afternoon. This is Chi Baker from Portland, Oregon, owner and lead instructor for Street Tactical Integrations, which offers internal and external martial arts, as well as creating balanced pathways, offering mental health and addiction counseling and clinical supervision. And today I am going to be talking mostly about rip currents / rip tides. I'll learn a little bit about other ocean features and concepts, but mostly talking about rip tides. And I'd hoped to post this earlier during some of the king tides that happened here in Oregon, but life was very busy, still is, but I was working about 70 hours a week. Things have calmed down a little bit, so here is the video. And as a disclaimer, this information is based on my research, my experience. It is not saying that from this you should go out and go into riptides or go into the ocean or start surfing. You should be able to navigate and check your own abilities. If you are interested in surfing, get lessons. And as always, I believe in the buddy system. At least go with somebody who knows you are out there surfing and may be able to track whether you're coming in or out of the water. So, riptides, rip currents. I use those two terms interchangeably. And yeah, the other part of this is I once worked as a river guide and have been trained in water rescue, search and rescue. So some of this goes from understanding hydraulics of the river, which also pertain to the ocean. So one thing to know is that 80% of lifeguards' issues and jobs is based on rip currents. So people getting caught in these currents and getting swept out and having to rescue people. It is not due to sharks, jellyfish, or those types of creatures. So most of us are worried, or some people are worried about sharks and getting attacked by sharks, particularly in Oregon. As I know it, nobody has died of a shark attack in Oregon. People do get attacked on occasion, but many people have had to get rescued and have died due to rip currents. So if you're worried about things, you should be worried about rip currents, not sharkies. All right? So you can sing the Baby Shark song and laugh about it. Okay, so again, 80% of what lifeguards do are helping people or rescuing people from rip currents. So that's why they are important. What is a rip current? A rip current is essentially a strong current that is on the surface of the water, which is very important to understand that it's on the surface of the water. And it's a strong current that leads you from the shoreline out to the greater depths of the ocean. So again, my drawings are, well, somewhat comical. So here we have the beach. And here we have our ocean. And what happens is that we get currents that go out. So if you are somebody in the water, you could be a swimmer, you could be a wader, you could be a surfer, and this current is going to continue to pull you out into the ocean. Okay, so how are rip currents created? A lot of times they're created due to significant changes in wave height. So this is often due, so there's some man-made things that are due to piers, docks, and groynes or jetties. Okay, the other things are due to rock reefs or sandbars. Now rock reefs typically are constant, or coral reefs are constant. Sandbars shift. They shift depending on the time of year, the currents that are happening, etc. Rip currents can also happen from waves colliding into each other. So if you have a north swell and a south swell, they come in and collide, they can create rip currents. So that water's gotta go somewhere. So they can happen suddenly too. There's more constant ones, again, due to either man-made or naturally made kind of barriers, as well as they can happen just kind of spur of the moment. So Let's see. The main ones that we have to worry about in Oregon are the sandbar ones. And that's because we have very few rock reefs. We have no coral reefs. And so the sandbars are the ones that we mostly have to worry about. So again, in my picture, what we're gonna do is that we've got some sandbars that are on either side. And so water flows in, and then there's this natural channel because this is deeper water than this, and it's going to flow out. So again, part of rip currents is that you have a lot of water, well, not a lot, you have water that is flowing in, right? So you have waves that are coming in, and that all that water has to go out. So some of it will naturally go back, but there is the same amount of water that's coming in can't be flushed back out. It's got to find a way to maneuver around. So what happens is this water is coming in, and then it's going to find these natural channels that run parallel to the beach and start to flow out. So there's less friction on these deeper waters, or the breaks between sandbar, and that's what creates the rip currents. So when we have, and in Oregon we have these really long stretches of beach, and what will happen is that you will have these natural rip currents that are incrementally along the long beaches. Smaller beaches will have rip currents as well, and some of them will actually be stronger because that water coming in's got to flush out. Going back to swells and wind direction. So if I say, oh, there's a north swell coming in, that means the swell is coming from the north and traveling south. Just as much as a north wind is coming from the north and traveling south. In Oregon, what is considered an offshore breeze is a east wind. It's a wind that's coming from the land, east, and going out west. Why do we like east winds, offshore winds? Is because that helps the wave come and stand up. So the wind blows against the face and it holds it up. The longer and the wider the faces are, the more we can do our fun little surfing turns. Versus if the wind's coming from this direction, it's going to topple the wave and it's going to break faster and it's going to be more mushy, and the ride is going to be less steep, and it's also going to be a shorter ride. So we're looking for east winds. Depending on the break, we're going to be looking for north or south swells. And I may go into kind of channels and eddy lines and stuff like that later on, depending on how much I remember and how long this video goes. Okay, so rip currents. Again, we've got these sandbars. Again, the currents are going to find the easiest access out, and so we're going to have these currents that flow along the beach. Okay, a lot of these rip currents are going to be stronger closer into the beach than further out, and that's basically because, again, this water's got to flush out. Out here, that water is still coming in, and so the rip currents here are going to get less and less. Which is important in terms of understanding rip currents as well as getting out of a rip current. These rip currents can go up to 8 feet per second. Now, if you imagine 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. 4 seconds, you've traveled 32 feet. That is fast, right? That is a long distance. And so you can swiftly be moved out to sea at a rate that is scary, okay? As well as even Olympic swimmers can't swim 8 feet per second, okay? So even some of the strongest swimmers in the world, during the strongest riptides, they cannot swim against them, which is why what you don't want to do when you're getting swept out is try to swim against, and come back in, okay? Fun drawings. That is impossible. You're not going to get back in as the rip current is sweeping you out, okay? So that is very important in terms of your safety, that once you get caught in these, you don't want to turn around and swim against them, even if you're on a surfboard, okay? Not going to happen, not going to work, okay? What you want to do is allow the rip current to flush you out, okay? The nice thing about this, let me erase part of it, is that rip currents, so 90% of rip currents actually will take you back into shore. So they'll go out, and then they'll start to curve, and they'll actually come back in, and then they actually do this. So we get a whole full circle. So 90%, up to 90%, they say between 80 and 90%, these rip currents are actually going to circle you around and come back in, okay? Those of you who surf, you know, like if you take that channel, so we're talking about Short Sands and the South Channel, that this actually will, say this is the south part of the wall, we take that channel out, I love it, I call it the conveyor belt. Basically, it's a free ride out to the break, and then it starts to sweep you out, okay? Usually at a point it starts to die down, and it doesn't keep pushing you anywhere, and that's usually where you hang out and catch the sweet waves in, right? So some of us who's used channels and stuff and ridden on surfboards, we know that that thing will sweep us out, and it will start to sweep you parallel to the beach, and it will start to die down. I've never ridden a swell or a thing that actually pulls me back in, but I've definitely ridden out a riptide that dies out, and you just kind of sit there, and then you catch the wave and you come back in, or if you want you can paddle back in. The other thing, and Short Sands is another great example, is that at stream beds or river mouths there tends to be riptides. Again, what those do is they carve a channel in the water, so that the sand is going to be deeper there. So let's say that this is Second Creek at Short Sands, and you've got that, and there's actually a riptide that follows that you can take out to the break. And so they can be very useful, particularly for us surfers who want to get out, particularly me, 48 years I think old, and I'm tired, I'm ornery, I'm grouchy. I'm not as strong as a swimmer as I used to be, so I rely on riptides and channels to take me out, because I don't get to surf as much as possible. I don't know why I haven't moved to Hawaii or Fiji or even to the coast, but I haven't. So I'm one of those dudes who gets out, like if I'm lucky, twice a month, and so I'm not in great paddling shape, so I rely on channels to get out. So they can be very useful. For other people, they can be very scary, which is again why we do this in terms of a safety. This is a safety video. These, again, 80% will flush you back in. Why is this important? If you get caught in a rip current and you're not trying to actively use one, do not panic. Do not panic. Panicking will make you tired. And when we get tired and we're in the ocean, that's when people drown. So what we're trying to not to do is get into a rip current if we don't want to, but we're certainly not going to hopefully drown or die from a rip current, okay? So if you get caught in one, again, you actually want to ride the rip current out until it diminishes to the point that you can go parallel to the beach and swim back in, or it may get so much that you don't have to swim parallel at all because it's flushed you out and you can just swim back in from here, okay? How far do these rip currents go? A lot of them are around 160 to 300 feet. 300 feet is about the length of a football field. So if you can imagine getting swept out the length of a football field, that can be scary. No doubt, right? Particularly if you don't want to be out there, particularly if you're not a surfer, or particularly you're not a swimmer, and you just happen to be wading in the water like a non-smart beachgoer, and you get swept out. People's pets get swept out a lot because people put their dogs and their little dogs out there and they just get carried away, and they, again, this is on the surface of the water. So Going back to some things, I know I'm kind of tangential. If you're wading in water, right? So you've got, here's our person. They're saying, yay, it's so nice to be at the beach, and I'm just gonna wade in water, and that's gonna keep me safe. Again, that it's not the water here that we have to worry about down below, it's the water here. And the higher you're wading, the more top heavy you are, and the more likely you're gonna get knocked off your feet. And when you get knocked off your feet and then you're traveling 8 feet per second, you're gonna be moving fast and get knocked off and be quickly out there, right? And if you're a swimmer or just kind of a wader that doesn't have like a wetsuit on and stuff, you're gonna get cold quickly. And that's when hypothermia sets in and the body starts shutting down and you get more tired and then you drown, right? And people call it the Coast Guard and all sorts of stuff. So be careful. Again, you wanna observe riptides and not wade in the riptide, okay? Going back to how do you recognize riptides? So riptides are difficult because sometimes they look like the most friendly part of the water. So a lot of times riptides, again, you have waves crashing in, and then you're gonna have kind of a calmer part in between the riptides. So again, here's our sandbar. So right here, sometimes this water in here is less turbulent and calmer because the water's flowing out. So these waves crashing in, and then you seemingly have this nice calm spot in between. And sometimes people are like, oh, that's a great place to hang out. Well, again, it is if you want to get out to the sea. It's not if you just want to kind of have a leisurely day and hang out, okay? So that calmer place is actually going to carry you further or quicker out to the ocean. So sometimes that calmer space is a way to identify a riptide. Typically what I do and what I tell people is when I get particularly to a break that I don't know, or even it's on conditions that are a little bit different, is I just sit there and watch the ocean. I watch and look at the tides, and you'll see from the foam and all of those where those riptides are. You'll see again, is that riptide predominantly going north, or is it predominantly going south? And that may be a piece of where you want to enter the ocean so that you can enter and then get out past that rip in time before you're swept all the way down the beach in either direction, or swept into the rocks on one side of the beach or the other side of the beach. So it's good to sit and watch the ocean, learn the ocean, let it teach you. Remember, Mother Ocean is way bigger than you are. And no matter how much of a badass you think you are, Mother Nature Ocean will kick your ass. Open up a can and blast you. So don't get too cocky out there, folks. Okay. Some riptides can go out as much as 1,300 feet. Now imagine getting ripped out 1,300 feet. That would be scary as all get out. Even if you're Laird Hamilton, he might not enjoy that. So you don't want to be that person. So again, watch and observe riptides. One thing that I was taught is that you can be being carried out, and you can attempt to swim parallel to the beach or perpendicular to the riptide. Some of these riptides are really wide, like really wide. And so you're not gonna actually be able to break through that riptide, particularly if you're not on a surfboard. Surfboard gives you more buoyancy, and so you might be able to punch through easier than if you're swimming without. Or sometimes actually it's better not to be buoyant because again, you're gonna be, if you're on close to the surface, it's gonna maybe drag you faster. At any rate, sometimes swimming perpendicular beach is gonna tire you out. So be careful. If you start swimming perpendicular to the riptide or parallel to the beach and you start getting really tired, stop. Just let it start to sweep you out. And hopefully if you're in the water, you know enough about swimming to do things like treading water, or the dead man's float, or lying back on your back and just letting your float out. As scary as that may be, you have to think in your head, this is what's gonna keep me safe, okay? Other things is that, again, calmer place or breaks in the waves. So you've got all these waves coming in on this end and this end. It's calmer in here, there's less waves, so that maybe look friendlier. Oftentimes, again, these channels or these riptides will have darker water because again, they're deeper, right? So the deeper they are, the darker the water is going to tend to be. Okay, how to manage and survive a riptide. Okay, the number one rule, right, is don't panic, i.e. stay calm, cool, collected, breathe deeply, use as less energy as possible, right? So what we want to do is conserve energy, right? So you don't want freak out. You want to calmly keep your head above water by treading water. Again, you can just lie back on your back or do the dead man's float, whatever works for you, but you want to conserve energy, okay? The other one, if possible, is you want to signal to people on the beach like this. This is the universal sign of distress, right? This is a boater's man sign that you're okay. So don't pat your head. That made people think that, oh, he's cool or she's cool. You want to do this. So if you can, wave your arms. Screaming can help to a level, but again, screaming is very taxing. So if you scream a lot, you're gonna wear yourself out. So you might scream a little bit, but if you keep screaming and nobody seems to notice, it probably means they can't hear you. So don't keep screaming. It's gonna waste your energy, okay? The other one is riding it out, which we already talked about, right? Allow yourself just to continue to take that riptide until it settles down and calms down, okay? And then only if you're a strong swimmer, right, should you paddle perpendicular to the riptide, okay? Again, that's if you're a strong swimmer, and if you're a strong swimmer and it doesn't work, then stop. Just let yourself flush out, okay? So those are riptides. I'm gonna quickly talk about channels because channels are very useful for surfers, and I already talked a little bit about them. But again, this is mostly about riptides and how not to get caught in them. That's the first one, is prevention. The second one is how to manage. Okay, so one thing I talked about in self-protection is the number one rule is don't be there. So in riptides is don't be there. The second one is as soon as you realize you're in one, get out as soon as possible, right? And the third one is if you have to do something drastic, and then get out there as possible. So what we want to do is try just not to get into riptides unless you're a surfer and you're actively using them for your benefit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about channels. And channels are kind of a quasi-riptide. So I'm going to use this as an example of Shorties. Shorties is basically a bay, okay? And on either side, the north and south wall, they're channels. And depending on the swell, one channel is going to work and one channel isn't. So we talked about before, if this is on a south wall, the south channel is probably your best option, okay? So the swell is going this direction. And basically what this does is it creates what is called an eddy, okay? So the water is going to come in and it's going to circle around and come back out. It's the same thing if you're on a river, okay? Same concept. You've got kind of a blockade to it. So the water is going to come in and then it's going to swirl back around, okay? So this is on a south swell. South swell, the south channel works really well. And this south channel will take you out, and normally it'll take you out just before the tip and flush you out, and then you catch those nice, awesome, big waves, yeah. And you can surf them all the way in. And then, again, if you're like me, who's old and tired, right? Once I catch a wave, right, I basically either catch a wave all the way in, and then I just get out and I walk over here and I ride the channel back out. Those of you who are young bucks or fortunate enough to go surfing a lot, God bless you. You guys can paddle back out, right? I'm usually not that strong anymore. Okay, so what we want to do is, again, south swell, south channel works really well. It's awesome. If you aren't knowledgeable or strong swimmer or good surfer, don't use the channel unless you're with somebody who knows how to use a channel. I'm not going to encourage people, beginners, ranked beginners, to use channels, because if you aren't knowledgeable about them and you take the channel on the wrong day, you might get bashed into the rocks, Okay, so if this is a north swell coming this way, right, it may look like the channel's working and it may be working slightly, but what happens is it's going to pound you into the rocks. Scary. Unfortunate. No good. Okay, so we don't want to do that. No, we don't. So unless you understand channels and you understand swell and wind direction and the conditions, I advise you to go with somebody who does, and they can teach you better about using them. Don't use this video as a way of like, oh, I know about channels now, because you don't. Okay, this is not a video for rank beginners to go and say, oh, I'm gonna go to Shorty's and go use a channel without having better knowledge or more knowledge. Okay. The other thing, it's the same thing on the north wall. So if this is a north swell, again, this north channel will work really well. Okay, the north channel tends to be a little sketchier than the south channel. Also to know is that it's good to look at channels at low tide and see what rocks are underneath the channels. Okay, because there are rocks under there. And again, if you duck dive or if you lose your board or anything, you may get pulled under, and if there's rocks there, you might get your head bashed in. No fun, no good. So it's good to know the bottom. A lot of times they talk about like to know the ocean, to know the beach, like go watch it all the way from high tide to low tide. See what's happening, right? See the currents, see the riptides, all that stuff. And that is going to help you be a better surfer. It'll help you be a safer surfer. And the safer the community is, the better the community is, right? All right. So hopefully this gives you some idea about riptides, a little bit about swells, a little bit about conditions, and so forth. If this was helpful, if you appreciate it, please punch that like button, punch the subscribe button. That basically makes it more accessible and available to others. And it will allow me to post more things. So hope you guys are well. Thank you for Jason for the Surfin' Oregon website. And this is mainly for that page and for the Oregon surfing community, but it's also for everybody. And hope you guys are well out there and be safe. Keep that tribe vibe going. And hopefully I'll see you out in the break. All right, take care.